Konnichiwa, minasan. O genki desu ka? Welcome to the intermediate course of my channel. Let's learn Japanese with Eric. In this lesson, we will learn how to say, you don't have to do this or that. Nakutemo ii. Let's begin. Hajimemashou. In this lesson, we will learn how to say don't have to do in Japanese. For example, you don't have to eat. 食べなくてもいい. I put the you in brackets because that can also change to I, he, she, it, or some other noun, depending on your sense. We will also learn how to say things such as, it doesn't have to be hot. Atsukunakutemo ii. It doesn't have to be quiet. Shizuka ja nakutemo ii. And it doesn't have to be a friend. Tomodachi ja nakutemo ii. The first example is a verb. The second example is an i-Adjective. Third example is a na-Adjective. And the last one is a noun. The formula for making these conjugations is to take their negative te forms, nakute, and add the particle mo, and then the adjective i, meaning good, to form nakutemo ii. Let's look more closely at where nakutemo ii came from. For verbs, adjectives, and nouns, there is a nai form or the negative form. From it, we form the negative te form, nakute, and we add the particle mo to form nakutemo, which means even if you don't do. This was the topic of the previous lesson, lesson 51, even if I do not. And we go one step further and add the adjective i, meaning good, to form nakutemo ii. Literally, it means even if I don't do, it's okay. So in other words, you don't have to do. Let's tackle each case separately. Let's start with verbs. Verb nakutemo ii. If you recall the 10 basic verb conjugations, which we tackled in lessons 26 to 30 for each verb category, the conjugation we use for you don't have to is the nai form of the verb. As an example of what happens to category 1 or root-dropping verbs, let's look at the verb taberu, which means to eat. From taberu, we form tabenai, which is the plain negative non-past, which means will not eat. And from tabenai, we form tabenakutemo ii, which means you don't have to eat. Basically, the nai changes to nakutemo ii. You can review basic verb conjugation of category 1 verbs in lesson 26. For category 2 or last hiragana changing verbs, the last hiragana of the dictionary form of the verb changes to its A series and we add nai. And from nai, we form nakutemo ii. You can review basic conjugation for category 2 verbs in lessons 27 to 29. For the 5 commonly used category 3 or irregular verbs, suru, to do, becomes shinai, and that transforms to shinakutemo ii, you don't have to do. Kuru, to come, becomes konai, and eventually konakutemo ii, meaning you don't have to come. Iku, to go, becomes ikanai, then ikanakutemo ii, you don't have to go. The negative of aru is nai, and that transforms to nakutemo ii, which means it doesn't have to exist. And the negative of da is janai or dewanai, and that transforms to janakutemo ii or dewanakutemo ii, which means it's okay if it's not. Let's practice making the nakutemo ii conjugation from very common verbs in all verb categories. Keep in mind the rules for conjugating the nai form from verb categories 1, 2, and 3. Let's start with category 1, or the root-dropping verbs. Miru is to see, and minakutemo ii means you don't have to see. Again, the you is in brackets because it can also be I, he, she, a person, or an animal, depending on the sense. Neru is to sleep, and nenakutemo ii, 寝なくてもいい means you don't have to sleep. And now on to category 2 verbs. Kaku means to write, and kakanakutemo ii. Kakanakutemo ii means you don't have to write. Isogu means to hurry, and isoganakutemo ii. Isoganakutemo ii means you don't have to hurry. Hanasu means to speak, and hanasanakutemo ii. Hanasanakutemo ii means you don't have to speak. Hakobu means to carry or transport. Hakobanakutemo ii. Hakobanakutemo ii means you don't have to carry or transport something. Yomu means to read, and yomanakutemo ii. Yomanakutemo ii means you don't have to read. Shinu means to die, and shinanakutemo ii. Shinanakutemo ii means you don't have to die. Tsukuru means to make, and tsukuranakutemo ii. Tsukuranakutemo ii means you don't have to make. Matsu means to wait, and matanakutemo ii. Matanakutemo ii means you don't have to wait. Tsukau means to use, and tsukawanakutemo ii. Tsukawanakutemo ii means you don't have to use. And for category 3 verbs, kuru means to come, and konakutemo ii. Konakutemo ii means you don't have to come. Iku means to go, and ikanakutemo ii. Ikanakutemo ii means you don't have to go. Suru means to do, and shinakutemo ii. Shinakutemo ii means you don't have to do. Aru means to exist for things and plants. Nakutemo ii. Nakutemo ii means it's okay even if there's none. Da means to be, is, are, or am. Janakutemo ii. Janakutemo ii means it's okay even if it isn't. Now let's look at sample sentences. Let's start with the category 1 verb, taberu. Negative is tabenai, and from there we form tabenakutemo ii. Tabenakutemo ii, which means don't have to eat. You don't have to eat all the sushi. In Japanese, sushi wo zenbu tabenakutemo ii desu. Sushi wo zenbu tabenakutemo ii desu. Zenbu, meaning all, is an adverb of quantity and does not need a particle. It is typically said just before the verb. Now to a category 2 verb. Isogu means to hurry, and its plain negative is isoganai. Nai becomes nakutemo ii, and we form isoganakutemo ii. Isoganakutemo ii, which means don't have to hurry. Because there's lots of time, you don't have to hurry. In Japanese, 時間がたくさんあるから急がなくてもいいです。時間がたくさんあるから急がなくてもいいです。たくさん is also an adverb of quantity and does not need a particle. It is usually said right before the verb. Another category 2 verb, osu, means to push, and its nai form is osanai. From there, we form osanakutemo ii. Osanakutemo ii, which means don't have to push. You don't have to push the button. In Japanese, ボタンを押さなくてもいいです。ボタンを押さなくてもいいです。Yasumu means to rest, and its nai form is yasumanai. Yasumanakutemo ii. Yasumanakutemo ii means you don't have to rest. Because I'm not tired, I don't need to rest. In Japanese, 私は疲れていないから休まなくてもいいです。私は疲れていないから休まなくてもいいです。Our last example is a category 3 verb, 勉強する, which means to study. We conjugate the verb する here. Nai form is 勉強しない and 勉強しなくてもいい. 勉強しなくてもいい means don't have to study. Because she's smart, she doesn't have to study. In Japanese, 彼女は頭がいいですから勉強しなくてもいいです。彼女は頭がいいですから勉強しなくてもいいです。The nakutemo i conjugation can also be used for adjectives. For i-adjectives, that becomes KUNAKUTEMO i. Let's look at how to make it. To illustrate what happens with i-adjectives, let's look at our example, the i-adjective takai, which means expensive or high. The negative is takakunai, which means not expensive or not high. You can review basic i-adjective conjugation in lesson 15. To continue, we then convert nai to nakutemo i to form takakunakutemo i, takakunakutemo i, which means it doesn't have to be expensive or high. And using it in a sentence, the gift doesn't have to be expensive. In Japanese, プレゼントは高くなくてもいいです。プレゼントは高くなくてもいいです。Another i-adjective example. Atsui means hot, and its nai form is atsukunai. From there, we form atsukunakutemo i, atsukunakutemo i, which means it doesn't have to be hot. The drinks don't have to be hot. In Japanese, 飲み物は熱くなくてもいいです。飲み物は熱くなくてもいいです。Now let's look at the case for na-adjectives and nouns. じゃなくてもいい。We mentioned over several occasions, such as in lesson 16 on na-adjectives, that na-adjectives are grammatically nouns. And when you have a noun as the predicate in a sentence, we use the verb da or des as our verb. This is the very first sentence structure you learned way back as early as lesson 5. A is B. A wa B des. The nai form of the verb des is janai or dewanai. Ja is a contraction of dewa. And changing the nai part, we form janakutemo i or dewanakutemo i, which means it doesn't have to be. Our first example is the na-adjective shizuka, which means quiet. Its nai form is shizuka janai or shizuka dewanai. And we transform that to shizuka janakutemo i or shizuka dewanakutemo i, which means it doesn't have to be quiet. Our sentence: children don't have to be quiet. In Japanese, 子供たちは静かじゃなくてもいいです。子供たちは静かじゃなくてもいいです。上手な means skillful or good at. We first encountered this na-adjective back in lesson 8 on expressing ability. Its nai form is 上手じゃない or 上手ではない. That transforms to 上手じゃなくてもいい or 上手ではなくてもいい, which means doesn't have to be skillful. Trainees don't have to be skillful. In Japanese, 研修生は上手じゃなくてもいいです or 研修生は上手ではなくてもいいです。Now let's look at noun examples. Eiga means movie. Nai form is eiga janai or eiga dewanai. Transforming, we form eiga janakutemo ii or eiga dewanakutemo ii, which means doesn't have to be a movie. Your hobby doesn't have to be movies. In Japanese, あなたの趣味は映画じゃなくてもいいです or あなたの趣味は映画ではなくてもいいです。kodomo means child. Negating forms 子供じゃない or 子供ではない. Transforming, we have 子供じゃなくてもいい or 子供ではなくてもいい, which means doesn't have to be a child. Persons riding the merry-go-round don't have to be a child. In Japanese, メリーゴーランドに乗る人は子供じゃなくてもいいです or メリーゴーランドに乗る人は子供ではなくてもいいです. The subordinate clause メリーゴーランドに乗る nominalizes 人 or person. You can review forming subordinate clauses using nouns in lesson 43. To summarize, in this lesson we learned how to say don't have to in Japanese. The conjugation for this is nakutemo ii, and this can be used for verbs, adjectives, and nouns. The conjugation derives from the plain negative or na form of a verb, adjective, or noun, which is then conjugated to the negative te form or nakute plus the particle mo and plus the adjective i to form nakutemo ii. Nakutemo ii literally means it's okay even if I don't do, or it's okay even if it isn't. Therefore, you may do, or it's fine even if it isn't. Just to put things into perspective, the nakutemo ii conjugation is the last of a set of 4. First we had temo, which means even if I do. We had this in lesson 50. Then we had the negative of temo, which is nakutemo, which means even if I don't, which we studied in lesson 51. Then way earlier in our course we had temo ii, which is may I or you may, asking and giving permission, which we learned in lesson 37. And the negative of this is nakutemo ii, which means you don't have to, and which we studied in this lesson. And this ends our lesson on don't have to or nakutemo ii. Any questions, just write them down below in the comment section. お疲れ様でした。頑張ってください。If you're serious about becoming fluent in Japanese, it's important to practice daily, learn grammar, and build up vocabulary. My whole course is designed to give you a strong basic foundation in the Japanese language that you can build solidly upon. So please click like, share, or subscribe and watch the next video in the series. Nihongo no benkyou ni ganbatte kudasai. じゃあ、またね。